The words hit deeper than I expected. No acknowledgement of the 23 years I had poured into this place. No mention of the sleepless nights, the holidays sacrificed, the countless crises I'd carried on my shoulders. Just a clean, clinical dismissal, like 2 decades of loyalty could be erased with a stroke of ink and a rehearsed sentence. On Tuesday, 3 days before my dismissal, I texted my son, "Noah, can't make it to your graduation next week. The company needs me for this deployment." He wrote back, "It's okay, Dad. I get it. I canceled that trip so I could finalize a system rollout that would make this firm tens of millions. And now here I was, discarded in front of strangers and a smug young woman who had never fought through a single midnight network collapse." Ethan Cole leaned back in his chair, suit immaculate, voice polished. "Sign the papers, Michael. Let's not make this messier than it needs to be. HR is waiting to walk you out." His eyes weren't apologetic. They were satisfied. He looked like a man who believed he'd won. I glanced at the thick folder he slid toward me. The weight of the papers felt heavier than paper ought to feel. It wasn't just a contract. It was an eraser. An eraser of my name, my legacy, my 23 years of weaving the invisible threads that held this company together. Madison tapped her nails on the conference table, short, precise, impatient. She looked like she was waiting for me to finish so she could rush back to stage a photo in the corner office. Around the room, no one spoke. No one thanked me. No one even pretended to defend me. With a steady hand, I picked up the pen. Ethan mistook my silence for defeat. What he didn't realize was simple and fatal. His flamboyant signature was already stamped at the bottom of those documents. With that signature, he had just triggered the one clause I had tucked away years ago, the clause that would undo him. I left that boardroom with my dignity intact. But when the heavy door closed behind me, the silence pressed in. For the first time in 23 years, I wasn't walking back to my office. I wasn't staying late to run simulations. I wasn't prepping slides to save a project nobody else understood. I was simply gone. Bitterness rose sharp in my throat as I thought back on all I had given this place. The fluorescent glow at 3 a.m., the hum of the servers as the only sound while the rest of Chicago slept. Weeks when I barely saw my own family because I was here, building systems that kept everything alive. Birthdays missed. Vacations canceled. Midnight calls where Noah would ask, "Dad, will you be home tomorrow?" And my answer, more often than not, was no. My marriage didn't survive it. Laura told me once, "You're married to Nexera more than you're married to me." She wasn't wrong. I wore loyalty like armor, convinced that sacrifice meant security. The scars didn't show up on any quarterly report. I thought about the morning I collapsed at my desk, chest tight, vision tunneling. The paramedics called it exhaustion layered over stress. A colleague rode with me to the hospital, my laptop open on his knees. Even on the gurney, I was answering emails. The company praised me for it. Dedicated, they said. Irreplaceable. Irreplaceable, until I wasn't. The worst scare was the night we almost lost everything. One shipment delay out of Busan set off a cascade of failures across 3 continents. For 56 hours, I lived on coffee and adrenaline, rerouting terabytes through a private Iceland backup, accessible only to me, using a handshake protocol I'd never written down. The network held, but only because I was its architect. That crisis changed me. In the aftermath, I realized a hard truth. This empire didn't stand on Ethan's charm or the board's glossy decks. It stood on trust one had personally built, relationships, agreements, and a lattice of contingencies only I could see. And trust can vanish as quickly as it's given. So I added something, buried deep in the licensing and operations framework, Clause 12b. If the original architect was removed without cause, all operational rights tied to the patents and live deployment keys would revert to the architect. The language was drafted as a non-assignability without consent clause, slipped into a rider on the omnibus licensing agreement. In the board minutes, it appeared only as a procedural safeguard to prevent external contractors from seizing control. To them it looked routine. To me, it was an escape hatch. I didn't think I'd need it. I believed loyalty would be enough. Walking away that afternoon, each breath felt like swallowing crushed glass, but I finally understood. Clause 12b wasn't a footnote. It was a lifeline. And in his arrogance, Ethan had just handed me leverage I never planned to use. The whispers started before I'd even reached my desk. I was a ghost haunting my own floor. Nepotism, they murmured near the espresso machine. The CEO's daughter, someone said under their breath. I passed clusters of employees pretending not to stare. Some eyes were sympathetic. Most were wary. No one wanted to be next. Madison, now the gleaming face of Nexera, walked the hall like she already owned it, heels ticking on stone, hair camera ready. I watched from a distance in those last hours, tying up loose ends out of habit more than duty. She swept into her first strategy meeting with Ethan trailing behind her like a proud press release. The moment she spoke, the mask slipped. She tossed out technical terms like confetti, suggesting they leveraged the blockchain to secure our patents. A phrase so fundamentally wrong, it was like suggesting we protect our gold by leaving it on a park bench. The room went quiet. Senior engineers looked at each other with careful, tired eyes. I kept my face still, anger coiling tighter. 23 years of precise language, and here was a child with buzzwords. Later that day, an executive moment hit the company chat. Madison's selfie in the corner office, captioned, "Work harder, rise faster. Running billion-dollar ops before 26. Hashtag leadership, hashtag nextgen, hashtag build different." My throat burned. I had slept in that chair more times than I could count. Now it was a backdrop for hashtags. Still, I said nothing. Silence was my shield. Let them think I was broken or compliant. Let Ethan mistake my quiet for surrender. I wasn't going to give him the theater of a scene. I would give him a lesson. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague who'd been with me since those early, chaotic years. She won't last 2 weeks. Everybody can see it. I allowed myself the smallest smile. Not joy. Not yet. Just recognition. The cracks were already there. Others saw what Ethan refused to see. You don't replace 23 years of sweat and midnight saves with a surname and a smirk. I packed my desk slowly. The framed photo of Noah in his Little League uniform. Now he was graduating college. The leather notebook filled with sketches that had evolved into patents worth far more than anyone had admitted. Even the half-dead succulent by the window, somehow still alive despite my neglect, felt like proof of stubbornness. People drifted by, whispering quick goodbyes, not sure if they were allowed to touch the moment. Funerals feel like that, relief that it isn't you in the casket. I kept my practice calm. Let them think the storm had cleared. The company's lifeline still ran through me. The 15 international partners, the intricate agreements, the live keys and validations, all those threads were mine. Paper signatures couldn't snip what they didn't understand. When I reached the lobby, I pressed my badge to the scanner out of habit. A sharp beep, then bold green text, "Access granted." I almost laughed. They hadn't even removed me from essential access. Arrogance makes people sloppy. I walked into the bright afternoon. To anyone watching, I was just another guy carrying a banker's box. Inside, I carried something else. A calm, precise certainty that the story wasn't over. The next morning I woke before the alarm, the habit of decades refusing to let go. No commute. No line of reports waiting on my chair. Just coffee and a broad skyline outside my apartment window on the near west side. I should have felt empty. I didn't. I felt like a wire humming with current. At exactly 9 a.m., the first crack appeared. A partner in the Netherlands halted a critical shipment of specialized modules. The message was clean, polite, and absolute. License inactive. Original architect required. I could see the scene inside Nexera's top floor without being there. Ethan pacing, barking into a phone. Madison scrolling frantically, cheeks pink. Her hashtags wouldn't help her. The system doesn't care about optics. It cares about keys. I let the moment sit. Not gloating, just the quiet confirmation that truth had teeth. They could take my office and my title, but the arteries of this company were tied to me and me alone. By mid-morning, the whispers turned to static. Old colleagues texted me fragments. Without Michael, no one knows the handshake protocols. Madison froze when someone asked about the contingency call order. The pitying looks from yesterday had turned to doubt about the new regime. Then, as if fate wanted to underline it, an email pinged into my inbox. Some logistics coordinator in Hong Kong had accidentally left my address in a reply all chain meant for Ethan's team. Subject line: escalation, network at risk. Delays from Amsterdam. Hong Kong refusing clearance without validation. Guadalajara holding an outbound pallet until architect confirmation. The lattice I'd woven was tightening, and Ethan didn't know which knot to loosen. I leaned back, sipping coffee, the bitterness softened by the satisfaction of being right. Yesterday, I'd been treated like an artifact. Today, less than 24 hours later, they were unraveling without me. On Wednesday, the ripples became waves. The Netherlands held ground. Hong Kong froze all logistics clearances. Mexico canceled a scheduled multi-million-dollar shipment. One by one, 15 partners sent the same message in different languages, original architect required. The arteries of Nexera constricted. Inside the glass tower on Wacker Drive, chaos. Runners in the halls, conference rooms blinking red alerts, calls at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., and then again at 6. Panic replaced arrogance as the building's new perfume. Madison tried to steady them. Around lunchtime, she presented a slick slide deck to the executive team. "We've identified the problem," she said, smiling like there was a camera. "It's a glitch in the contract database. Legal says we can override it. Ops back online by end of day." For a breath, people wanted to believe her. The stock even twitched upward, like a stunned bird ruffling its feathers. That night, the system answered. A synchronized burst of messages hit every node. Contract invalid. Original architect missing. Every partner, every supplier, every hub got the same verdict. False hope shattered. Calls dropped. The stock, briefly buoyed, fell harder than before. Ethan dialed personally, voice sharp and tinny on international lines. Most didn't pick up. One supplier in Guadalajara did. The call lasted under 2 minutes. When Ethan demanded to know why they weren't cooperating, the supplier cut him off. "We work with Michael Grant. No one else." Then they hung up. In a desperate move, Ethan tried to bypass the system, hiring a team of expensive outside consultants to brute force a solution. They worked for 72 hours straight before concluding the architecture was an impenetrable fortress legally and technically tied to my identity. His last-ditch effort only succeeded in costing the company another $1 million. I pictured Ethan in that moment, the tight jaw, the vein at his temple. He was discovering, too late, that control on paper isn't control in practice. He'd always thought the empire was his. It never was. The tension peaked. Employees whispered in corridors, wondering when paychecks might bounce. Investors demanded answers that didn't exist. I stayed quiet and watched. The collapse wasn't complete yet, but the ledge was crumbling beneath Ethan's shoes. Dawn brought an emergency board meeting. Executives in rumpled suits. Directors on screens from New York and San Francisco, eyes hard with fatigue. Every monitor in the room pulsed with red alerts. Contracts invalid. Supply chain halted. Madison, pale but determined, clicked through another deck. "Contingencies," she chirped. Lines and arrows promised upward motion. Voices on the speakerphone cut her down. Angry investors, out of patience. Outside, the story slipped through the building's glass walls and into the world. By noon, headlines rolled across business channels. Nexera supply chain seized by licensing clause. Architect at center of crisis. The public latched on. On socials, #ReinstateMichael began trending. First in Chicago, then nationally. Memes compared my decades of service with Madison's slogans, pairing her "build different" caption with a chart that only went down. Employees added fuel. On LinkedIn, an anonymous post read, "They fired the one person who knew how to keep the lights on. Without him, nothing runs." It caught fire. Where was I? 2 blocks away, in a quiet cafe on a side street off Wabash, black coffee cooling as I scrolled through the chaos. For the first time in months, I felt steady. The world was unraveling around Ethan, and I didn't have to move a finger. Then my phone buzzed again. Not a friend. Not a colleague. A blocked number. "We need to meet." Off the record. Monday night. The signature line identified only a role. Director, Nexera board. I let the phone sit. The irony was almost delicious. They let Ethan toss me aside. By the following Monday, less than a week after my dismissal, the board was already reaching out in secret to the man they'd erased. I stirred my coffee and watched the swirl settle. Tom was on my side. When I walked into that after-hours boardroom, the air smelled like nerves and tired cologne. The projector cast a single document on the wall, my dismissal agreement. The screen was bright and unforgiving. At the bottom, in bold ink, Ethan's signature. The company's counsel cleared his throat, voice thin. "As you can see, Clause 12, B was triggered when Mr. Grant was terminated without cause. The language is explicit. If the original architect is removed without cause, all rights tied to the associated patents and live operational keys revert to him. Silence. Heavy enough to bend the glass. Ethan's jaw flexed. Then he slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. We'll sue. We'll bury him in court until he crawls back. The counsel didn't flinch. With respect, sir, there are no grounds. The clause is airtight. You signed it. Litigation would fail instantly. Directors shifted in their seats. Investor faces glared from the grids of the video wall. One director leaned forward, voice clipped. So we're saying that by firing him, we transferred control over 39 patents and all the live keys to a private party? The number hung there like a toll, 39 patents. $980 million in valuation estimates, last quarter's figure. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. The counsel continued. He holds the rights legally, absolutely, and irrevocably. The reversal is immediate and already recognized by several partners. One of Ethan's old allies let out a bleak breath and said, flat as ice, "You didn't just sign his separation, Ethan. You signed your own." The silence after that was the kind that changes careers. By the next morning, it wasn't just an internal crisis. It was a spectacle. Nexera loses $980 million patent portfolio in CEO blunder. Cole's clause backfires. Cameras swarmed Ethan as he tried to reach the revolving doors. He hid behind his leather briefcase, but the lenses still caught him, sweat on his temple, eyes pinched. Madison vanished. No stories, no posts, no selfies. Her curated life went dark. Inside, the collapse accelerated. HR inboxes flooded with resignations. Some were tight and professional. Others were handwritten and furious. "I won't serve under failed leadership. This company betrayed its architect." By Friday, whole teams were running at half capacity. The exodus was quiet but unmistakable. Meanwhile, the public turned me into a symbol I never asked to be. One network looped the lobby video of me leaving with my box. Calm, steady, unreadable. An anchor called it the walk of quiet power. People shared it, said they saw dignity. Strangers messaged me. They underestimated the wrong man. Ethan tried to stage a press conference. Under the lights, his composure cracked. Reporters shouted until one voice cut through. "Mr. Cole, are you aware that the 39 patent portfolio, valued at $980 million, now belongs entirely to Michael Grant?" Ethan froze. Cameras zoomed. He glanced at counsel, who stared ahead. The silence was catastrophic. That clip replayed on every feed by nightfall, and with each replay, his empire shrank a little more. The papers came through the following Monday morning, crisp and final, 10 days after I'd carried my box out of Nexera. My name, Michael Grant, listed as the sole owner of 39 patents and the corresponding key frameworks. No conditions, no contingencies, no fingerprints but mine. For the first time in 23 years, my work wasn't tethered to someone else's ambition. It was mine to shape, mine to protect. I didn't go back to Nexera. Why would I? I called the partners who had stood in the trenches with me. People from Amsterdam, Hong Kong, Guadalajara, Austin, Raleigh, and beyond. They answered quickly, their relief audible. We rebuilt ties, this time on mutual terms. 2 weeks later, after the dust at Nexera had settled into chaos and my name had begun to appear in headlines as both culprit and savior, I signed the lease on a modest office off Dearborn. High ceilings, big windows, bare walls. Not an empire, just a beginning. It wasn't about grandeur. It was about freedom. On my new desk sat a small wooden plaque, freshly engraved. Michael Grant, Chief Architect. It was more than a title. It was a declaration that I had survived betrayal and reclaimed my name. I unclasped the old watch on my wrist, a gift from Ethan in the early days, back when promises still sounded like truth, and laid it next to the plaque. A relic of a past I no longer carried. The twist arrived quietly, the way opportunities prefer. An international conglomerate reached out, an offer to serve as a global innovation advisor, guiding strategy across multiple industries, from energy to logistics to smart infrastructure. The role was larger than anything I'd imagined. I accepted, not for prestige, but to help ensure that people like me wouldn't be erased because someone with a title decided they could be. By Thursday, the Nexera board asked for my terms. I didn't want their chair. I didn't want their building. I wanted their acknowledgement and a clean break for every engineer they demoralized. They agreed to a slate of changes I proposed. Technical leadership elevated to decision-making roles, real succession planning, no more photo-op promotions, without competency sign-off, and ethical clauses that protected architects from political purges. They didn't do it out of virtue. They did it because the market demanded they stop bleeding. By Friday of that same week, 2 weeks after my dismissal, Ethan resigned. The official statement called it a transition. Everyone knew better. The empire he built on charm collapsed under the weight of his ego. Mine, built on quiet, stubborn experience, was just beginning. Noah came by that weekend, hand in hand with his girlfriend. We ate pizza on the floor of my new office, boxes for plates, sunlight on bare wood. We talked about his plans after graduation, about a small app he'd been prototyping with a friend. I asked questions and listened, really listened, without checking my phone, without that old phantom vibration tugging me back to a crisis. "You seem different," he said as we packed up. "Like you're actually here." I finally learned the difference between building something for someone else and building something for yourself, I said. There's still a clip that plays sometimes on business channels, the lobby footage. Me walking out with that box while an empire crumbled behind me. People play it as a cautionary tale, or a parable about hubris, or resilience, depending on their angle. I see something else. I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking towards something, quiet, steady mine. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers. It shows up in the fine print, in patient silence, in a clause nobody read, in a door that closes softly while a window you never noticed swings open. The young alphas forget what the gray wolves know by heart. Experience isn't obsolete. It's irreplaceable. Try to rip it out, and the architecture collapses, not despite the foundation, but because of it. Ethan learned that too late. I learned it just in time. If this hits you anywhere deep, if you've ever been told you're replaceable by someone who's never held a braking system together at 3 a.m., remember this. You're allowed to write your clauses. You're allowed to protect your name. And you're allowed to walk out calm, even while the cameras flash, because the work speaks, whether anyone listens or not. Noah texted me a photo later that night. Him and Laura, my ex, at dinner. She was smiling. Life had a way of circling back to the people who kept showing up. I wasn't trying to fix what we'd broken. Some things you honor by leaving in the past. But I was trying to show up differently for the future. The next month, I hired 3 engineers who had resigned from Nexera on principle. We built a small team, 8 people, 2 interns, a whiteboard wall, and an espresso machine that sputtered like an old engine but worked if you spoke to it gently. We set our own rules. We kept our promises small and our deployment solid. When we shipped, we slept. The calls kept coming, not just from the conglomerate, but from smaller firms who'd watched the spectacle and wanted a different kind of ally, someone who wouldn't sell them a buzzword deck and disappear. We said yes when the work was honest and no when it wasn't. The refusals felt as good as the deals. The best messages came from the quiet ones, the engineers who never say much on company Slack. "Your story was the first time I felt seen," one wrote. Another, "Thanks for proving competence still matters." I saved those. One evening, months later, I took the old watch from the drawer. The leather was still soft. The hand still moved. I set it by the window and let the last of the sun spill over it. I didn't need to wear it anymore. Time had already told me what I needed to know. The night we flipped our first major release, we ordered takeout and waited for the monitoring dashboard to hiccup. It never did. The green lights stayed green. We laughed like kids. I sent Noah the dashboard screenshot and a single line. We shipped. He sent back fireworks. A week after that, a reporter reached out for a Where Are They Now segment. I declined. Let the clip stand where it stands. Let the footage loop until it wears out. My life isn't a loop anymore. It's a line, drawn forward. I keep the banker's box on a shelf in my new office. It's not a trophy, but a map reminding me that you can't get here without crossing through there. If there's a moral, it's simple enough to fit on a sticky note. Protect your name. Build clean. And when you walk, walk steady. The people who need to hear your footsteps will hear them. They heard mine. And finally, I heard my own. This is one of many stories about quiet justice and stubborn resilience. Follow us for more stories from the trenches of modern work.